Time doesn't erase murder. It just hides it better. They said the case was closed. They said no one was watching. But someone always is. Enter the shadows, where every whisper is a clue, and the line between justice and obsession disappears. This is Santana True Crime.
Welcome to Santana True Crime. Tonight we've got a packed house with us. We've got Allie Seibert with us, who has her show Allie in the Archives. You can get that on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. She is also the author of several books, to include Bloodstained. You can get that on Amazon. And our special guest today is Dr. David Hayes. Dr. David has a very interesting career as a criminologist. He also teaches at a prison and has worked in the film industry as well. Dr. David and Allie, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, David.
All
Hello.
right. So it's really, I think we can start out with how the two of you met, because Allie is the one that brought you to my attention. Dr. David, can you give us a little bit of information about your background and your education?
Sure. Like you mentioned, I was in the film and entertainment industry for years, producing and writing, and mostly as a screenwriter and a performer. And I started teaching at a college level in Arizona when a production partner and myself were asked to design a film program for Grand Canyon University. And at that time, I started to take some psychology classes, kind of fell in love with it. And then that's kind of what moved me into my next phase. But ideally, I started the study of behavior as a writer of fiction, a screenwriter of fiction. And so from there, I moved on to working within the psychology field, still teaching English and communications, of course, still dabbling in the entertainment industry. And this has kind of moved itself into that work as a criminologist, like we discussed earlier today. No one really knows what that is, and it's basically just a criminal behavioralist with a structuralist and a behavioralism sort of background to not really predict crime, but kind of figure out where we've been, why we do it, and how it happens. And that in turn has led me to teach within the prison system in Michigan through Jackson College. I teach in the associate's degree program, psychology and communication for some of our incarcerated individuals, and that has really led me to be a prison education advocate. I would say there's a real effect that it has on recidivism and making our community safer. And at the same time, I still consult with some cold case units on that criminal behavioralism and the contextualization of it.
Amazing.
That's all really interesting. And my understanding too is you apply this to jury selections as well.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So the gamut of forensic psychology isn't just about cold crime, or about criminal behavior. It's about jury behavior. It's about attorney behavior. It's about police behavior. Anything where the law impacts psychology is what forensic psychology kind of deals with. And if someone applies that directly to jury selections, so for those of you, I mean, I'm sure most of the people listening to your show are aware of how juries work, and there's the voir dire and the choosing of people. And depending on what side you've been hired from as a forensic psychologist, then that side is going to want jurors that are more likely to vote in their favor. And, attorneys and other legal entities appreciate the idea of looking at them and being able to include or exclude who they need to. And in terms of the voir dire, it's a lot like getting a list of people with attributes, and then trying to, from a sociological, anthropological, and psychological standpoint, figure out, based on this amount of data and some of the questions that you get to ask them, which ones of these people are going to be more likely to vote in your favor, either as the prosecution or defense.
So I find that fascinating, and especially of how high profile or how a lot of these big cases are so transparent, almost to a fault.
Mhm.
So when you're working with defense teams like that, do you take in mind the media attention that is being brought to these cases? Or I guess
Definitely.
ideal juror, for example, Karen Reed, that just happened not too recently.
So I'm having a moment. Karen Reed, what was the crime?
I'll give you a different one. Let's say that Brian Kohlberger from the Idaho 4 murders,
Sure.
that went to trial. And the defense team reaches out and they say, you know what, we need you to help us pick a jury. What kind of jurors are you going to be looking for?
Right. So the jury is going to mean that's a case where no one's going to come in as a blank slate. It's going to be incredibly difficult to find somebody that doesn't know anything about this. And if they say they don't know anything, then they're probably lying to get on the jury. So that's an eliminator question right there. What I would look for in terms of that jury, based on who this person was, I would look for younger people, no one that has children, specifically no one that has children of college age, because then you're into I can see my child in that sense. I would go for more often than not a as many white males as I could put on that jury, because there's that identification level with the defendant. Um, Interestingly enough, I would probably try and lean more toward um I don't know how to term this so no one will get angry, but I would
Please
probably go with
don't worry about offending people. So,
okay, good.
yeah.
So I would probably go with more religious people, specifically religious people. If we could find that we're in Lutheran, Methodist, and a Judeo-Christian outside of Catholicism, because of the different belief, really not different belief systems, but the other side of death belief systems, and the ability for redemption stories to play a larger part, because that redemption story is something that I think the jury or the defense would need to try and get in there as quickly as possible. Again, and I wouldn't be going for an acquittal. I would, and I'm not sure what the law in Utah is, but I would completely only try for an elimination of the death penalty, because you're not going to get an acquittal. That's not going to happen.
That's really interesting. Allie, have you ever been selected for a jury?
No, and I'm bummed about it every day of my life.
Okay, so I've been called 2 times,
Are you
and
serious?
yes, and one of them was a Raleigh case while I was with the Raleigh Police Department. It was laughable. I thought that they would just, kick me out right away, and they finally asked me the question, "Do you know anyone in the courtroom?" And I was like, "Yeah, I know the charging officer, the DA, and the defendant at the time," which was
Yeah.
funny. And then I got called in Wake County. You can be called every 2 years. And it was like on the button, I
What?
got called again, and I actually made it all the way through lunch, and I thought they were gonna put me on the jury. And again, like, I was being open that I was a active police officer at the time, but, they finally booted me off. Funny thing
Really?
about that is they actually put my mother-in-law on that jury. We both got called on the same day for the same case. So I don't know what the
Is
odds
this
are about that, but thought it was
is
just
this a
kind of
county of like
laughable.
a county of, like, 5 people? Like, how many people live
This is
here?
Wake County.
What?
This is, one of the largest counties in North Carolina, which may not say a lot to some people, but, you know, it's a
That's
good-sized county.
wild.
Uh,
No,
I was
I've
on
never
a
been called. I really want to, though. I think it'd be so much fun.
I was on a
do you
federal grand jury. And so we met, it was during COVID. So it took about 2 years every other Wednesday. And we would meet and to go through different federal crimes,
Yeah,
mostly
so with things
felon
like
in
that,
possession with a handgun.
Oh,
when
that's
people
so
find out
fun.
about your background, were they not wanting to dismiss you or
No, I mean, I was hoping. 'Cause I mean, I didn't want to commit, every other Wednesday for 2 years. Well,
Right.
it was supposed to be just a year, but it turned into 2 years due to COVID. And I was like, yeah, hey, I do this and this is kind of my background. Here's my education. And I'm probably not the best choice for this. You're gonna want, people that are a blank slate. And they were like, you should be the foreman. Like, no, 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 but I got put on. I was not disqualified.
Yeah,
Really?
that's
I did
fascinating.
I did see people get disqualified. The easiest way, here's my tip for anyone who doesn't want to be on a federal grand jury. Say when they ask you if you have any strong beliefs, and you should say that yes, everyone should be able to benefit from the Second Amendment, even felons. And they'll be like, nope, you got to go.
That's
That's
awesome.
amazing.
So one of the things that I've noticed in, obviously I watch a lot of true crime and read a lot of true crime, and my wife kind of does as well. So we're always watching the new trial that's going on. Do you think that this, I guess, this era that we're in with technology and social media, how I almost feel like the trial has already happened with the
Mhm.
amount of attention and evidence that is coming forth. And I realize that, some of the stuff is public record. Like they'll only seal a search warrant for X amount of time, but eventually it gets all released. Do you think that has any effect on how these cases are chosen? And what effect do you see that on the criminal justice profession?
So I think there's really, this is the first time in human history that we've been able to have this kind of access to any kind of information. So if you remember, if you're old enough, I mean, I'm sure, well, I don't know, I don't want to make judgments. Not everyone could be old enough to remember the OJ trial,
Yes.
wherein it was largely broadcast. We watched it 24/7. The chase with the Bronco, the entire investigation, all the way through it. It was still limited information though. But now what we have in terms of social media and the internet is, and this is more dangerous than just information. This is where supposition and someone else's ideas can happen. There's no gatekeeping of truth on the internet. And without a gatekeeping of truth, without someone being able to say, like, no, that's not accurate, it didn't
Mhm.
happen like this, then we have mass mistruths, or supposition, like I said, or someone's idea of how something may have went down. This is the way I figured it happened because it's the only way I can work my mind around it. And depending on the size of that person's platform, then the misinformation gets out there. And I mean, this has just been a steady increase, though. I mean, a large reason why most investigations of serial murder kind of stall in the investigation phase is in large part due to the bad science from the FBI in the 1970s, like the Mindhunter stuff, when all these buckets of serial murder were created, and it's the super genius white guy that's super charming because they weren't scientists and they only talked to super genius white guys that were charming, and so these became our stereotypes, which has infused itself into investigation and popular culture and thought. And so we take something like that and then we put it into the internet and it explodes. We've never been able to create our own bubbles before, to make an algorithm specifically for me, and only the things I believe are going to come into my feed, and there's no outside information. So we can get our wrapped up in that misinformation and in these untruths or half truths, and that is to the detriment of our trials, our investigations, people attempting to help. The web sleuth problem is indicative of this. For every case that a web sleuth helps on, they're bogging down phone lines for 2,000 more, where precious manpower can't get out there and actually help.
Yeah, so funny that you say that about the web sleuths, because when Allie first told me about you, it's like, yeah, he's a criminologist. I thought, okay, is he an actual criminologist or is he a quack? Because there's
You think
so
I would
many
bring
out
you some
there.
sort of quack? Jeez
They're not
Louise,
mutually
show
exclusive in
trust
my
in
world.
me.
I
Well,
can
it's
be
like,
a quack
you
and a
probably bought
criminologist at
some
the
of
same
her
time.
books and they had a good conversation, and you know,
So,
we'll see
and
if
I
he's
explained
actually.
to you. I don't think I explained to Ellie why it's criminologist. So I don't plan on being a licensed psychologist. I'm not going to get a license in the state I live in. I'm not going to go into therapies and do clinical stuff, and that's not going to happen. So I don't want to have psychologist as on there, because that would imply the licensure. So criminologist is essentially what we do is just study criminal behavior and apply it to what we've got going on.
Interesting.
Yeah, so with the cold case work that you
Mhm.
do, can you explain your process of how you work with those? So I think I told you this, but my brother and I actually wrote this book, A Murder on Campus, Professor the
Oh,
Cop, in North Carolina's most notorious cold case, which covers the 1973 murder of Virginia Olson, who was murdered on the campus of UNC Asheville. And with that, it was extremely difficult because they lost a lot of the records. They lost the search warrant. They lost the ME's report. We had to go and find that stuff. The suspect in the case, his Army record had been destroyed due to a fire. A lot of people that you're trying to interview are either dead, in a nursing home, or senile. A ton of stuff can come out when you're working on these, and maybe it's not necessarily one in the 70s. Is there a process that you go through with the departments, or what does that look like?
it depends on the department. It also depends, and maybe sometimes it's not with a department. It could be just for a family, and helping in that sense as well. But as far as the process goes, it varies by the type of case, how much information is available. Like you ran into very little information. That's something that has to be tackled right off the bat. It varies in whether or not there's an accessible crime scene or there's information about a crime scene. I can't tell much without a crime scene, aside from potentially things that could have happened en route to something, because really we take that evidence from our crime scenes, our secondary, our primary crime scenes, whatever you have, or any other areas where we could have left something behind, or engaged in an act of some sort. So I think overall, depending on what the crime is, my process would probably be to contextualize it. What we run into a lot of times is we apply like 2025 morals, ethics, and social norms to 1973, and that's a
Right.
really difficult way to go about this, because why someone behaved in the manner they did in 1973 is absolutely different than in 2025. The reasonings could be different. So what I try to do is take a sociocultural kind of snapshot of the specific area that we're talking about, and then put together people, the main components of the case that we're talking about, people like them, what would they be like, and how would they work in this specific temporal context. A lot of that goes to the idea of psychological autopsies, and I've worked with the American Association of Suicidology, and they have a interview process called psychological autopsies that they generally utilize to determine the root causes of a suicide, but they're incredibly helpful as far as cold cases are concerned, because what you're trying to do, if you have a deceased person who you are trying to find the killer of, and a killer who you don't know, then all we have are that surrounding information about them, whatever historical context there is, whatever contextual context, and whatever you can draw from surviving people that knew them. And so the psychological autopsy process goes through the surviving people, as very sometimes incredibly difficult questions to get to why this person was where they were, without a bad or a good or a negative or a positive, simply just why, what could have got them there. And then contextually, temporally, what type of person would they have kind of encountered at that point? And we try and marry those two. I usually try and avoid going over suspect lists until we kind of get an idea of who could have been around, what type of person would be in this area doing this sort of thing at this sort of time, when available. And then we'll try and marry maybe a suspect list, something, maybe a flag will jump out, maybe something glaring that we have missed before. But the sad part is most cold cases won't get solved. And it's just a fact. And the major reason that I do it, and I think the major reason that most people in law enforcement do it, is just so these victim families know that someone is still looking. Really, it's kind of like solace to them, that no one's given up yet. And once in a while when it does hit and you do find that closure, that's amazing. But yeah, for the most part, it always feels like putting a puzzle together and you just don't have all the pieces. And sometimes you don't even have that outer edge, because when you start with the puzzle, you usually do the frame first, and even without pieces of that. So
Have you ever
yeah,
worked on a case where it was a cold case and you weren't able to find all of the evidence, but you still felt certain that you knew what happened?
I I want to say yes, but I'm never certain. It's like
Sure.
there's always something. I have an issue uh unequivocally saying yes, this is probably what
Uh-huh.
happened, because
Yeah.
again, we don't know. No.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of things, a lot of cases that we've gone into where we have a very good idea of what probably happened, even if we can't prove specifically
Mhm.
what happened.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So, and I wasn't
Yeah.
aware of your book. So in that case, did you in your book, did you come to any type of conclusion?
So that's interesting that you mentioned that. And we had narrowed it down to a few possibilities. And then after the book came out, we started to receive information from people that were in the area or worked on the case, which was we were eventually contacted by one of the lead investigators, and he got a copy of our book and told us that, quote, we deserve to know what really happened. And he actually walked us through of what he believed happened that day. And
Mm.
it's really interesting because that case didn't get any attention. In 1973, it did, but then after that, it kind of fell off.
Hmm.
And on campus, they just got a small memorial for her. And there is a painting, which is the cover of the book, that is in the theater room. But a lot of people didn't know who Virginia was. And that was one of the big reasons why we did the book in itself. But it goes back to some things that you're saying is uh, of how our expectation when we're talking about this is that we're putting that 2025 standard, where in 1973, for example, at crime scenes, they would take very few pictures because bulbs and the film were expensive. And this
Hmm.
is a small department. They also didn't have professional training until, North Carolina training and standards happened in 1973. So you had, inexperienced officers. They, in our case, even though they won't admit to it, but we actually had a lead detective confirm that they lost the rape kit. They had a semen sample. We know that the semen sample exists because we were able to get a copy of the autopsy, and we know that by the 80s, they had already lost all that. So, you've got these incredible, difficult hurdles to get through.
Mhm.
And we believe that we know who's responsible now. We believe that John Rivas Jr. is the one that did it. He came from a prominent family, and they were able to get him into some mental institutions, which is where he eventually died. And we believe that a guy named James Gore is morally responsible because he was there as well that day. And he actually had a church in Black Mountain, North Carolina. I'll call it a church loosely. Some people called it a cult, but it was this whole thing where he believed that light and nature would give you energy. And what we later learned was that, uh, to quote the investigator, he was into, quote, some real shit or some real weird shit as far as sexually. And we believe that that was probably the motivation for the murder, is that him and Rivas were out that day looking for a victim. But again, like, these cases are so hard because to keep a case like that in the public light is hard when you don't have a family member that's pushing it or a department that's pushing it.
Right.
And that's one of the things I find interesting when we look at cold cases that do receive that attention, like the JonBenét Ramsey case, where that is a case that people probably know, that's around at least my age. I'm in my 40s.
Mhm.
Um, and I feel that a part of me says there's some hope in that being solved one day, but the other part of me is, we put that 2025 standard, and we're used to DNA being collected properly and for everything to be on video at some point, and for us to be able to pull the GPS location of the cell phones in the area and those really technical aspects that they just didn't have back then. What are your
Right.
thoughts on that?
I think, I mean, looking at the evidence and the probable behavior behind the evidence, I think it was a break-in. I don't think the family had much of anything to do with it at all, and do think that there was some ethical considerations from the law enforcement investigating that had to be looked at, because um, the media attention on that was fast and furious. It came incredibly quickly. It was pervasive, and one of the investigating officers actually wrote a book during the investigation. Released it on the guilt of the parents, before there was any any inclination that anyone would be charged with anything, much less tried. Um, what was unique about this one is that pageant um, component, and the pageant component made it a no pun intended sexy topic for daytime television. And that's when the aforementioned quacks would come out, and there was a lot of video footage of JonBenét performing. It's all over. It's a pageant thing. It's what happens. And utilizing that footage, coming up with the conjecture, sexualizing, her performances, blaming the parents for this. I think that's really, kind of the start of this true crime obsession, and the idea of not the web sleuth at that time, but the armchair detective, really getting modernized. And if we look at the evidence, you know, the 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 autopsy revealed some taser burns, for example, on JonBenét's body. You know, behavior wise, you don't tase your child to bring them downstairs. You just grab them and you go downstairs because they're your kid. They're going to come with you. There's just, you know, so many. That's just one example of many different odd sort of criminal behavior elements that were in there. Overall, I think that it was the pageant industry that probably created the person that did this. It was probably someone that would come to visit these multiple times. Not many people know. For example, there was a similar break-in a couple of miles down the road a few weeks before to another girl in the same dance class as JonBenét, and you know, very similar. Tried to, you know, abduct a child, sort of thing. And I think that law enforcement probably has a good idea of who's responsible for it, mainly because there was a long list of men that would frequent these pageants, and not have a participant in the pageant.
Ugh,
So I
that's
think
terrible.
that's pretty much where we're going to go with it. But the theories for years have gone back and forth, and it's revolved around the parents. I think John and I think Patsy was the mother's name, were vilified for decades over this, and it got down to the idea that, you know, media took a ball that a botched law enforcement handed them, and you know, ruined, you know, not only did these people lose their child, but they lost their, you know, essentially their lives
Mhm.
to this. So
Yeah.
that's where I'm at with it. I'm going with a break-in from a pageant stalker.
Allie, are you familiar with the JonBenét case?
I am. Yeah. Well, yeah, I've watched a lot of documentaries on it because that's how I spend my time. Um, and I find it fascinating because like it's interesting to me because I think a lot of the documentaries that I have watched are biased and are kind of leading you to believe almost always that it was the parents. Because
If
I
I can
think
interrupt
a lot of them,
quickly,
yeah.
all documentaries are biased.
Well, that's true.
Every single document. There's a narrative, there's a storytelling element to all our media.
Yes.
Carry on. Lesson over.
No, you're totally right, and that's a great point. But I think a lot of them, when it comes to JonBenét, are pushing you to believe that it was the parents who did it. So, I don't know, maybe this is just a call to action for everyone to do their homework and their research when it comes to watching docs, because it's like you know, you watch something and you're like, "Oh, yeah, like, obviously it was them." But if you watched it and it was made by somebody else who wanted you to believe this other thing, then you'd come away with the opposite belief. So it's
Right.
tough. But for a long time, long story short, for a long time I was like, yeah, it was obviously the parents. But I have since come to your conclusion as well, and I think that it was probably a break-in.
So it's interesting. So the question isn't about the bias of the documentary. It's why would the average person find the parents a good suspect? And I think I've kind of broke that down in terms. If we go back to that structuralist, you know, why we believe what we believe, sort of thing. Um, they're a family of affluence,
Mm,
and so far away from the average media goer, right? The person watching Sally Jesse Raphael and the person watching Geraldo do not have money, and they don't understand why they don't have money and why they're not like that person that they're seeing up there. And it kind of automatically vilifies the person with affluence and money because they're so far separated from them. And those people have to be inherently weird because I'm the good person
mm,
and I'm not that person, so I have to be inherently, you know, different from me. And so it's easier to make them the villains because no one can really understand, not no one, but the average person can't understand the life they live. That's why they, you know, so easy to delve into the pageant culture aspect of it. Why would someone put their child through that? Why would someone do this? Well, you know, Patsy Ramsey grew up in the South, and in the South, that's the culture. Your girls do pageants. They do pageants. And if Patsy Ramsey didn't win, then she could be living vicariously through her child. That's, that happens all the time as well. I had to learn the trombone because someone couldn't learn the trombone. I didn't want to, but that's what happened. And but that's, we don't take cultural no, different way to say it. We tend to make different attributions for different cultures. We're human beings, we do what's called a fundamental attribution error. And if we see something we don't agree with, we will make the assumption that person's a bad person or there's a personality flaw because their behavior isn't comporting with something that I believe in. So, for example, Patsy Ramsey and the pageant culture, millions of moms across the country thought that's a horrible human being for what she did to her child. And I could see where someone like that would, whatever weird satanic cult thing someone had come up with that week. So when we make those fundamental attribution errors, we're not being clinical. We're not stepping back. It's kind of the same thing with the cold case. This is a 1993 case. And if we try to apply, how someone behaves in 2025 and head on a swivel, always looking out for danger, we're post 9/11 at this point. Our danger levels are different. We look for different things. So if we say, oh, well, those parents, they should have been more aware. They should have been this. They should have been that. It could be 2025 doing it. It couldn't be us not being affluent people of means and making that fundamental attribution error. Whatever it is, when we're ascribing guilt to someone, it's generally based on these personal factors as opposed to the real factors that we have going on. And I think that's where the largest, law enforcement botch happened in terms of, and I don't remember, is it Boulder, Colorado?
Yes.
Boulder, Colorado's, small department. Their detectives went in with a chip on their shoulder, indicative by all the media they did during the investigation and the books that were written. And so they wanted the Ramseys to be guilty because it just made sense. Maybe they were making a fundamental attribution error in that sense as well.
Yeah, and I
do you
completely
sorry,
agree with that as far as of how we already go ahead and we make those assumptions, and it's just like it snowballs into almost a theory to this is the absolute truth when there's no basis for it. What drove me insane about that case is that Mr. Ramsey was blamed for finding her body, and as a beat cop, not setting up a crime scene and allowing people to come in and have, donuts and coffee in the kitchen while you should be looking for that body and locking that thing down. I thought that was unfair on the media, but I feel like he got vilified for that. One thing I did find really interesting, which I want to get your thoughts on, is the note from that case that was so detailed. And that's what really threw me towards, okay, is this a family member? Is this someone that knew them personally? Because how else would you know to ask that amount? And I know some of the quotes came from some older movies. What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm glad you asked. I love the aspect. It's called the criminal humanities, and really what it does is it applies, the study of English and the humanities and human works of art, and kind of examining those for a criminal element. And if you look at this letter, and the letter is long. It's, most, ransom letters are quite short. There are those specific numbers in there that match up to bank accounts. If someone had been breaking in quite a few times, then they could be familiar with the family's, stories and finances or whatever's happening right there. But if you read the letter reads like someone who saw a bunch of movies on abductions and thought this is how a letter should sound. It's very, serial villain sort of thing. Like, Lex Luthor wrote this letter to Clark Kent because he's got Lois Lane right now. And I in a series of events that I would assume to have happened, if my theory is correct, would be the child try to leave with the child's either the suspect couldn't control themselves or the child died accidentally. I'm probably going to go with couldn't control themselves. And then the letter written as a way to buy time, quite possibly, and make that sort of a focal point of it. But I don't think anyone in the house wrote the letter. I think Patsy Ramsey was actually cleared with handwriting analysis, as weird as that is, and not as you can't really utilize that in court too well. But the letter, when you read it, it reads like someone wrote it in a high school creative writing class when they said, "Oh, we need a ransom note for this play. Can you do that for us?" Like, "Oh yeah, I can write a ransom note."
What amazes me about that is the amount of time that would take to write that. And that's what I always wondered if that was written. I believe they went to like a Christmas party that night and everyone was out of the house. And one of the things I thought of was, maybe he broke in, was in the basement, had nothing to do, and started to write this letter
Yeah,
because just the sheer amount of boredom. And that always just amazes me of how dedicated a lot of serial killers are, of how they'll be that methodical to be able to sit in a room. I don't know if he sat in their house or if he wandered around, but I think that's probably a legitimate reason for why people thought that was a family member, just a length. And what you're saying is, a lot of these times are give me, $100 million at this location or something bad, something very short and to the point. But the thought of someone killing a small girl like that and then not freaking out and just sitting down and writing a letter, that just seems very bizarre. Do you think this person has murdered children before?
I would guess that this is pure speculation, that the attempted abduction a couple of weeks before, or maybe a couple of months before, whatever it was, could have been a first try at something. This is a second try. I think if they had done this before, then they would have been successful. This doesn't seem like a very successful criminal. I mean, if their goal was to steal a little girl for nefarious purposes, well, they blew it. They obviously got too wrapped up into what they were doing and couldn't control that aspect of it. But the letter, I would think that if we build in stages, how no one starts with murder. If they're planning into these things, they're gonna build into these things. So I could see the multiple break-ins into the house. I could see that basement being an entranceway for that person multiple times. It's not like they checked it often. It could have been like that for weeks and months. And this person just embedding themselves in the house like creepy style, in the closet. I could see that waiting for a perfect time. That could be possible, but that level of dedication, because like it all depends on what the fantasy is, right? If the fantasy is being in the house undetected and no one knows you're there and you can do whatever you want, and it's this power game where you have this absolute power over this family, and at some point, the love of your life's going to come home with you. You're going to choose when, though, and it's going to be you're going to make that decision. I could see where that could happen. That's that's part of that fantasy, the power game fantasy. I think most of those guys that were showing up to the pageants have that power fantasy. We would probably call them incels now, but not that it didn't exist then. And instead of going to pageants, they'd probably just group together online and decide, a school to shoot later, because we tend to do this now. But at that time, I think that you could even probably have thought maybe he's saving her from this family who are putting her on display all these times, and he'd have to do his rounds and get in there and figure out the family dynamic in order to make that happen. So, any number of things could have happened with that. But yeah, it's all gonna. If we ever find out who it is, we're gonna have to directly talk about that fantasy aspect of it, and what fantasy were they living out, and what power dynamic were they shooting for in the fantasy.
So speaking of talking with people like that, you actually teach, some people that are murderers and criminals in prison.
True.
What is that like to I'm sure you know some of their background, I would assume.
Yeah, we know everyone's name, and we have the internet, so we can find pretty much anything else out that we want to. I will say that most of my students are really good people that made a horrible, horrible decision on one really bad day.
Mm.
And I'm in Michigan, and so we know that our sentencing is 60% longer than the rest of the nation. So they're paying, in the socially acceptable way for this. Um, some of my students are a little more infamous, and it's an interesting dynamic. When we go into a course like that, the teacher student dynamic is something that I think is really important. I haven't met a student yet in prison that isn't there for noble reasons. Either they're trying to change their lives, they're learning a new skill set to help do this. Some of the people I've talked to have been in there for 40 years, and they're taking
Mm.
classes now, and they're fundamentally different people from when they started in there. So yeah, they're the backgrounds on some of the people are tough. They are always not always the most pleasant things that have happened, or they've been incarcerated for. But at the end of the day, these are different people than when they went in. And if they're getting to me in the classroom setting, and I'm not just going to interview somebody for an organization, if we're in a classroom setting, then they've proven that they deserve to be there in some respect already.
Can
Mm.
you kind of paint us a picture of what that looks like just from a practical sense of is this a state prison,
Yeah, yeah.
kind of a minimum security thing, or are these guys I believe you did say it, there's some murders in there or
Mhm.
some guys have committed crimes against children.
Runs the gamut, really. Yeah.
And what's kind of like that classroom dynamic? Is this something that, like I was in a public high school as a school resource officer for a few years, and a lot of the classrooms, the kids would be disrespectful, and there's a lot of riffraff. What's a prison classroom like?
So I think it's more disciplined in one sense. Um, Now we're in a state prison, so these are state felonies, state level felonies, and in Michigan we have levels of prisoners. So 1, 2, 3, and 4, with 4 being the most violent. And people can move up and down the scale through their prison term depending on their behavior when they're incarcerated. So most of my students, or actually all of my students, have to be a 1 and a 2. So lower, they haven't had any issues in the past few years. Generally they're going to be ticket free. I don't know what they call them where you're at, but tickets are things you get for behavior issues in Michigan prisons. So they're going to be ticket free. So there's a baseline for being able to participate in these college programs. Of course, they'll have to have their GED or high school diploma, of course, as well. But when I go into a classroom, um, uh, I go through the same bubble. We get the same checks as everybody else. The shoes and the socks, and make sure everything is kosher. You're not sneaking anything in. There is really a sense in the classroom, though, of gratitude that someone's taking the time to do this, and I understand how incarcerated individuals can feel kind of forgotten because they largely are. We paint that picture and socially as well, you're in prison, you must be an animal. Good, stay away, make us all safer by being in there. But really, when the reality of it is, like I said, most of these students are generally very happy to be there. This is a chance that they wouldn't have had otherwise. It's a chance that they've earned in this program right now, so it's really respectful. There's a very little riffraff. The conversations are far better than in any other college courses that I've taught. These are men and women, anywhere from 19 to 56 years old. My oldest student right now is 64, and they've led lives. All criminal career is still a career, so they've had some critical thinking skills, and it's they've got practical applications of information that 17 and 18-year-olds don't have. So the conversations in here and the practical applications of how these things work are really interesting, and I find the conversations with the students in these it's our in the carceral settings are sometimes far more beneficial to me than the other conversations. And I know it's beneficial to them as well, and it really is that dynamic. I mean, I feel like when I walk in there, I'm not scared. It's not a terrifying thing. I'm literally the safest person in a prison because I know if anything happens to me, the person that did it is probably going to literally die that night, and because they've just ruined it for everyone. So I'm okay. I got guards looking out for me. I've got the prisoners looking out for me. All is well on my front. But it's the hardest thing is really dealing with the facilities themselves, who really don't want the services to be there. And then another hard part is dealing with the educational institutions, because a lot of them are looking at this as just a cash grab. And it's not fair to the students who are they're benefiting from Pell Grants, of course, the same Pell Grants that anyone else would get outside, and just kind of using them for that sense. But
That
good
was
students.
Yeah. That was gonna be my question, is that, like, because obviously these programs exist,
Mhm.
but do you feel like they exist as like a check mark on a list so that they can say that they're providing this service to these people? Or do you feel like they're actually there to help them succeed?
So it depends on the institution, I think. Not the facility can say yes or no. So the fact that they say yes, even begrudgingly, I'm good with, because I don't want much more out of
Yeah.
the facility itself. Um, the institutions, I think it depends on what level the institution is at. I know that it was only last 2024 that Pell for All happened. Before that, they
Mm,
had canceled Pell for Prisoners in 1994, and then it was on a limited basis. So Jackson College in Michigan and a few other schools in different states did a pilot program for about 10 years, 2012 to 2022, to see if it would work, and it worked out really well. And it's I mean, like logically, the only thing that we know that affects recidivism rates when someone gets out of prison is their level of self-esteem when they're in prison. And the only thing that we can point to with numbers that improves self-esteem in prison is education and training, and giving opportunities that wouldn't exist outside of their prison system. And so,
really?
like, these two ideas, they make sense only if we're in a society that doesn't give lip service to rehabilitation, and
Mhm.
that's kind of what we do. We talk about it like, well, I want to get rehabilitated. Well, here's the data, here's the numbers. Why can't we have these programs for everyone? I got a list of volunteers that are going to come in and do this, and then we'll help everybody out. And it kind of gets pushed away because that doesn't fit the narrative. But these are really good things, and I think the institutions, um, depending on who they are, either do a really good job with it or they cash checks with it.
Yeah.
And I've seen, like, the larger state schools in Michigan, like, there's some incredibly passionate people that run these programs. some
Mm.
incredibly passionate people about prison education. Some programs are run by ex, COs who
Wow.
don't think that people deserve an education because animals and such. So it all
Mm.
depends on where we're at. I'm grateful to work for and with institutions that care, which is great. But yeah, I mean, like the data's there. It really is. If someone gets released, if we could fix the self-esteem within prison and then fix the leaving process, the returning citizen process, where someone isn't forced back into a same life that they would lived in before. If we
Mhm.
could kind of marry those two, that would be probably a really wonderful thing, and we would literally see safer communities. We just would.
Mm.
So
Man.
I know that this is a very broad question, but I'll let you run with it. Do you think, or what do you think should be done with the prison system if you're given that power? Uh, what changes would be made that are practical and effective? And I know that you said that, this is about rehabilitating the prisoner and making them able to be a product of society. Uh, do you think, is there anyone that there's an absolute no go to, that
Yes.
these people should
Yeah.
not be let out? And how, as a society, do we balance that?
Mm.
So we need to balance this as an individual basis. I know because as a society, as an American society, we have buckets and we make those attributions and we put this person, the group of people over here, and this group of people over here, and this group of people over here, and they all get treated the same way in that section. And they all get treated the same way in this section, and they all get treated the same way in this section. But if we could make it more individualized, I think, and do this case by case. Are there some people that should never, ever, ever leave a prison system? 100%. There are definitely people that should never, ever, ever, ever be around human beings again.
Mm.
But there are people that should never have been around human beings until they were 22, and now they're 46.
Mm.
Michigan, we
Mhm.
don't have good time. We don't have good behavior. It's you serve your long sentence and that's it. So that's what I would change in Michigan. I would look at institute a process of good time and look at a fundamental change over somebody. Somebody is absolutely different. Our brains aren't fully developed until we're 25. And if someone's making all these horrible decisions at 21, 22, and 23 in the context of where they're living, right? Where it's socially acceptable and warranted to make these terrible decisions, which aren't the same, three neighborhoods over, no one would make those decisions. But here in this neighborhood right here, this is how it's done. And you've got generations of this, and they're just living into their cultural context and not able to judge outside of it because we don't that brain elasticity is still all over the place. When they hit 45, 50 years old, are they a completely different person? Yeah,
Mm.
most definitely.
Mm.
I've talked to people that went through puberty in prison, tried as adults,
Mm.
and that
Mm.
will fundamentally destroy you. So individualize it. Don't I would say don't paint the the prisoner with the brush of their crime
Mm.
for the entirety of their lives, because I think that's a difficult process. And the major thing I would do would be improve the food. You improve the food, then you improve
Yeah.
behavior, you improve health,
Yeah.
you improve self-esteem, you improve everything.
That's really
That's
interesting. With the food thing, that's not something that came to mind, but makes absolute sense. So, guys that are preying on children, are these guys no goes? Uh, is there anything you can
Man, that's a
do with
rough one.
them? Or,
Like that's the hard part for me in trying to be clinical too. So if I'm going in, I got to talk to somebody and it's child exploitation charges and I'm like, oh, okay, what do I do? Still a human being, still a human being, still a human being, still a human
mm.
being. And so we roll in, I have to like coach myself through that. But it's an interesting thing though. So when I was on that grand jury, There was lots of things that would come through. Mostly, like I said, felon in possession of a handgun. It's federal crime. But if someone receives or sends child pornography, it's a federal crime because it's an interstate commerce. It's going across states. And so these people would come in, and I had there was 26 of us as jurors, and they're just grand jurors handing out indictments. And so this group would question everybody. If a cop would come in and testify about a felon in possession of a handgun, they would grill the cop, say, okay, where was the handgun? Was it really by them? And they were given this due process to all this information coming in, unless someone came in and they were charged with a child exploitation thing. It was instant. Let's vote now. No one testifies.
Wow.
It's the charge in and of itself. And I found that was fascinating. And I'm like, I wasn't, going to speak up against it, 1 against 25. And then I'll be like the guy that loves, child porn, because we know how we do in this country. But it was a fascinating process, because everyone else, people would, grill an FBI agent about something, to get the data right. But if someone is simply accused of child porn, then it was, all right, let's convict. You indict. Let's get rid of them. Another one off the books. So it's interesting, right? It's a great big way for me to give you a non-answer. I do not know what I would do. I just don't. And it's like let's look at right now. This Epstein stuff. Whether you like a president or you dislike a president, there seems to be a general swell of everyone gets along by saying, pedophiles are bad. That's the one thing everyone seems to agree on right now. And it's interesting.
It is, and
Yeah.
I think that to add to that, even prisoners agree that pedophilia is bad. And I mean, you can watch plenty of, I believe they call them like chomos, the child molesters. If they come in and they're labeled as a child molester, it's open season. And
So that's interesting. So when I think I told Allie this about how prisoners divide up. So when
Yeah.
someone goes to prison, they don't know what it's like to be in prison. They have movies and they have what their uncle told them maybe, but nobody knows. So the behaviors they engage in are the same things that they would engage anyplace else, except filtered through they're doing what they think they should do. And when someone gets in there, they usually break up by race first, because identification theory means that we're going to find the people that we think are most like us, that had the similar experiences that we've had, that kind of know us. The easiest thing to do from out looking at people is like, well, they're the same color I am or close, probably have a similar experience. So that's the way we break up there. And then they kind of break up by crime. And so gang guys will hang with gang guys, drug guys with drug guys. Just how it kind of breaks up, because we're looking for that similar experience. And then there's this weird out group that's kind of forced to hang out together, where it's the child exploitation guys, men transitioning to women, and some of the more bizarre crimes like the serial murderers and things. They're kind of forced to create their own in group, whether they like each other or not is immaterial. But we need human interaction. We need to be part of an in group. It's kind of what we do, and so they're kind of forced together. And uh, the derision that group is shown is sometimes pretty intense. If I have to quell something, if there's a disturbance in class, it's usually going to be in my psychology class. It's usually going to be discussing a phobia or a philia or something. And someone who's in for child exploitation will ask a question, and the rest of the class will jump on them and try and beat them down for it. And that's when I'll have to put the everyone's a human hat on. Like, this person gets to ask a question. Doesn't matter what they did in here. This is kind of the green zone, DMZ as far as that's concerned. But yeah, it can get pretty intense in there.
You and
Not
I, we
class,
talked
but
about. You and I had talked about this was a couple weeks ago. We had a conversation about the shame that people feel in prison and how it manifests a little differently than what you might expect. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Remind me specifically what we were talking about, because if
We were
I
talking
think I know.
about we were talking about, there seems to be
Was
almost like an invisible line of what
Oh, yeah,
is yeah,
gotcha. Um,
go ahead.
s woo, sometimes I get lost in my own weird
No,
theories. So,
you're good.
shame is a different thing. Um, there are some things that people feel shame over, some things that people don't feel shame over, and a lot of times going to be a cultural context. So where you grew up, what you do, how you were raised, all these other structural aspects of things can give you this approach to the world. So your approach to the world is this set way, and sometimes you may feel that you're being incarcerated for doing something that's completely socially acceptable in your world. But there's also this level where um if you're incarcerated for a thing, let's say you're a serial murderer, for example, and you are completely fine with everyone knowing that you killed 9 prostitutes, but you have a real problem with them knowing that you would cut their heads off and then pleasure yourself with their heads. If I'm, going to get creepy with it,
Mhm.
because that's the thing, that's the line too far. That is too far. That is so way outside of socially acceptable that even they can feel shame in that sense. Where there's a pretty I guess it wouldn't be a prevalent story. It's a good story. My mentor told me about the Dahmer case, wherein not many people could figure out why Jeffrey Dahmer stopped killing at 17 and then started again in his 30s. Like usually that doesn't make sense, right? There would be an escalation of things. Something should have happened in these 14, 15 years for that to actually be a thing.
Yeah.
And what he discovered in talking with the Dahmer family, and this is all of course anecdotal, so who knows if it's really true, but it makes sense that Dahmer would routinely dig up corpses and satisfy himself with corpses,
Mhm.
or attend funerals and things like this. So like necrophilia
Oh,
was a like a mitigator of murder. And as abhorrent as that is, that knowledge is not something that he was going to tell anybody. It's one of those shame level things, right? Like
mhm,
killing a bunch of men and being gay is bad enough, but no, there's no, I would never do that. I would never dig up a
mhm.
corpse and do terrible things like that. So these shame points are areas where it even pushes the boundaries of what someone is believing in and of themselves. I think I told Allie there was I had a student that minute I walked into class said, "Oh, I'm here on a trumped up drunk driving charge." Like before I said hello, before anything, and I was like, "Okay, that's good to meet you. I'm Dave. Nice." And I went to go and look him up later, and he's in on child exploitation. But he's using the drunk driving charge as this beard to be able to be in this in group that isn't shamed, because he's hanging with the guys
Mm.
that are in there for substance abuse,
Yeah.
completely
Yeah.
socially acceptable substance abuse guys, and not the out group of the weirdos where he would be forced to do. So the idea of the shame is interesting.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
gotta be a survival tactic if you go to
Oh yeah,
prison, just knowing.
smart one.
Mhm.
Yeah, I meant say murder or something that is not gonna get you messed with. I I I think that, that kind of aspect of Dahmer is really interesting that you brought up. And I know that, or what I've heard is that with serial killers that they start with small animals and then, you kind of progress throughout the way. I is there any truth to that? And is there anything that's like, okay, it's socially acceptable to kill an animal versus a person, so that's how I can justify it to myself or not have that
So
shame of killing a person, then it gets
like
too
like
much?
The animal thing, jury's out. Does it happen all the time? No. Have some, people who've gone on to kill multiple human beings killed animals at first? Yes.
Mm.
We're so good at making boxes and one size fits all things that it's that kind of hampers us. I don't believe Dahmer killed animals, but he loved roadkill. So there's that. An interesting aspect, if you can believe his father. And again, remember, everything is coming from the people themselves too. So yeah. Now, the big aspect of being able to kill multiple human people is by not believing that those are human people. So the act of dehumanization is something that is just it's kind of this precursor to being able to engage in the act. So, for example, if someone who's killed 9 prostitutes, they probably don't believe that prostitutes are real people, and they're disposable. We see this all the time, like depending on, where you're landing on immigration issues and things like that. It's easy for us to dehumanize somebody. Like the term illegal alien in and of itself is a dehumanizing term. It's an alien, it's not human.
Yeah.
So as we dehumanize people, it's much easier to kill them.
Okay.
And I don't really think it's I haven't run into anyone that's rehumanized a group of people after they've killed a bunch of them. But there are, I mean, it's an interesting point. So like the ability to kill an animal and the ability to kill a human being are kind of the same thing if you're dehumanizing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I'll hit on this while we're talking about this kind of subject with Dahmer, because you see this, and you actually, in my book, we had a case that was tied to the Virginia case where a guy, he killed a woman in the exact spot of Virginia Olsen, and he would come back and visit the body to have sex with the corpse.
Mm-hmm.
Intimate. This is not to be too graphic, but just, to try to paint the picture. This body is decomposing, and after he gets into the taxi cab, after he's done having sex with the dead body, there is, bodily fluids on him that are repulsive to the point that the taxi cab driver calls the police.
That's
Is
rough.
there Can you explain why serial killers or people in general um, can do things like that as far as necrophilia?
Necrophilia is a rough one. This would where you need my mentor, and he's like the nation's leading expert on necrophilia. His name's Eric Hickey. He's amazing. So if you ever seen like a
What a
Netflix
title.
documentary, let's say, gonna study something, study that. But it's necrophilia. I think in the case that you're talking about right now, I don't think that's a sex thing. I think that's a power and ownership thing. And as you as long as it's still there and you can still revisit this and you can still do what you want to do, then that's power and ownership over that person.
Mm-hmm.
So it'd be the other equivalency would be keeping this person alive in a basement and doing the same thing. But they did not. And thing without knowing much more, that's probably where I would go with it. When we're talking about things like the partialism with a head and stuff like that, that's, by the way, necrophilia with just a body part. It's called partialism, for anyone who needed to know that.
Yeah.
Actually, did not know
Bring
that.
that up at your
Yeah.
next dinner party. You'll be the hit of the
Um,
place.
if you're with the Donners, I guess, sure. But so like the idea of like Dahmer using it as murder mitigation and staving off these like because when you look at Dahmer, not a psychopath, absolutely not. Lots of substance abuse involved with it. he just wanted to make forever friends in the most terrible, terrible way possible. All these abandonment issues resulting in this thing happening. Digging up these corpses, it could be just the same as making those forever friends. He didn't even have conversations with people. He just wanted people that wouldn't leave him. Your guy with the gooey taxi ride is I think a little different. That's more power. That's a power dynamic, because we see that a lot of times with not even just serial predators, someone who kills someone, deposits a body somewhere in a secondary crime scene and returns to it over and over again, reliving the power of that moment over and over again. And I would assume that when that person, finally desiccated to the point where there's not much that he could do anymore, he would find someone else.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Well, speaking of being forever friends, I appreciate you coming on the show. Is there
beats acid in the head?
You like that? Is there
I
anything
hated
that
it.
you would like to plug? How can we get in contact with you?
Sure. And so if anyone has any questions or has a case that they want someone to look into, it's always pro bono. I don't charge anybody anything. That's not the point of it. So you can go to hayescriminology.com and all the info and contact information is right there.
Well, thank you. And Allie, as always, thank you for coming on the show. Your show,
thank
Allie
you.
in the Archives, what is the next episode going to be on?
Oh, yes, it is about, sorry, you'd think I would know, but I don't. It's about Alice Collier, who was a 15-year-old girl who disappeared from Detroit in 1930. Her body was found several miles away a couple days later. It's a case that went unsolved for a little while, but then there was this huge break, and the question then becomes, what else did this person do? So it's
Well,
it's super interesting, and I'm excited to share.
And that's going to be coming out on Thursday?
That'll be out Thursday, yeah.
All right. Well, can't wait to hear it. If you'd like to support me, you can buy my book, A Murder on Campus, A Professor, the Cop, and North Carolina's Most Notorious Cold Case. You can also do a free version of supporting me, which is by liking and subscribing to the videos. We would also love to have a review from you. Thank you both for coming on the show, and we will see you next week.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, guys.